Welcome to Reality 129, where land is the most valuable thing. 9 out of 10 areas of this place are consumed by the ocean, which is a never-ending blue sea that never stops moving. The continents we know are now only broken pieces, with sharp peaks, volcanic ridges, and weak archipelagos where people cling like barnacles. The Earth is a planet of water, and to stay alive, you need to know how to deal with storms, currents, and the sea's changing moods. Civilization had to leave the Earth as the last big glaciers melted, and tectonic shifts pulled valleys under waves. Drowned cities, countries disappeared. The last of humanity took to the seas, erecting huge flotillas held together by steel and huge arcologies that float like fortresses. Some people lived on mountain islands and kept the little bit of land they had safe. But most of them live by the sea, where their lives are measured by storms and tides. These floating nations were first brought together by necessity. The storms were too destructive and the waters were too big for partition. But as usual, power makes people want more. The fleets broke up. Some became into nomadic tribes who sailed across boundless seas. Others built empires of the waves, constructing warships as big as islands and covering their bows with steel they found in the ruins below that had been drowned. And in the depths, where the light fades, new powers began to move. Creatures of flesh and machine that had learned to live in the dark and waited in silence. Reality 129 is most afraid of the drowned ones, not the storm or the hunger of the depths. People can't agree on what they are. Some say they are people who left the surface a long time ago and have been secretly adapting and establishing towns in trenches illuminated by geothermal fire. Some people say they are something older, something that came along because of evolution, that sped up because the Earth was drowning. Sailors talk about how eyes light under the waves, how ships are pulled down in quiet, and how voices echo through steel hulls at night. No empire has ever proven their existence, but too many fleets disappear for it to be a myth. The Fleet of Halvor is a roaming country of 20,000 people who are tied together on decaying ships. They float through the Pacific gyres, picking up what they can from the wreckage below. Divers in exosuits go down into the submerged remains of historic skyscrapers and bring back copper, steel, and sometimes artifacts from the past. On the surface, humans keep going, growing food in hydroponic vats and getting water from towers that never stop condensing. But their divers haven't come back in a while. People have observed strange shadows in the deep that circle the fleet, like wolves encircling prey. When the previous expedition brought back a piece of black metal with symbols on it that no one could read, everyone started to fear. Was it a remnant of an old metropolis or a sign that the drowned ones were claiming land? The Council for Halvor fought all night. Some people wanted the fleet to go north, toward the mountain islands that were only secure for a short time. Some people said that battle was necessary to go down into the ruins and face whatever was below there. Others, though, talked about making deals with enemy flotillas that could buy them safety at the cost of their freedom. The ocean itself seemed to answer that night, when the 2 moons rose above the waves. A faint hum came from the blackness below and shook the steel hulls of all the ships, making them quiet. Without breeze, the sea churned. And suddenly, the lights appeared. They were pale blue and rose from the depths, making a huge circle around the fleet. Kids were crying. Soldiers had guns that wouldn't do much against the sea. The elders prayed. The council didn't move. For the first time in a long time, the residents of Halvor understood what sailors were saying in secret over Reality 129. The drowned ones were real, and they had arrived. The circle stayed there all night with 50 faint sparks just below the surface, rising and falling with the wave like patient, attentive eyes. There is no breeze. There are no birds. Just the low, steady buzz that shook every hull and rib. On the flagship Helia, the council stood still until Elder Kira finally said what everyone was afraid to hear. Parley. They called for Mara, the fleet's head diver. She was a lady whose lungs had been under more pressure than most ship's plates. The piece of black metal with strange symbols on it was on the table between her and the counselors. Ion, the head engineer, kept looking at it like it may answer a question on its own. He remarked, "We found it stuck in a high-rise skeleton. The marks aren't rust. They are carved, on purpose. Patterns happen over and over again, just like grammar." "Then give it back," a fisherman said in a low voice, his knuckles white around a rusty knife. "We poked a god." Mara responded. They're not gods. The sea would have killed us by now if they wanted us dead. As the moons went down, she wrapped herself into her exosuit. She moved slowly over the deck while kids pressed against the railings to watch. The ocean smelled like copper and ozone. Tethers whined. When she went into the dark, the fleet moved like a single organism holding its breath. The ring of lights opened, leaving just enough space for her to get through. At 20 meters, the sound shifted to a deep hollow sound like a cathedral. At 50, the light began to pulse, pause, pulse, as if the water itself had learnt to communicate in heartbeats. Mara's visor showed wavelengths as ghostly glyphs, while the suit turned pressure signals into rough tones. She believed she heard shapes in the layered thrum. Syllables. They stood at the border of what could be seen. Shapes that wouldn't be easy to see. Bodies that looked like smooth obsidian and had joints where human joints shouldn't be. Eyes that were bright, not with iris or pupil, but with rings that opened and closed like tidal pools. Fins that weren't fins at all, but groups of segmented plates that could bend like fingers or lock like shields. Natural, made by design. Both. One moved forward slowly and without fear. A ring of blue bacteria swirled around it, forming a comet. Tail. The suit's translator made a scratching noise in her ear, then selected a place to stand. Return. Limit. Not yours. Mara calmed her breathing. We didn't know, she murmured, her voice stiff in the helmet. We thought the city was dead. The lights surrounding her flickered and fell toward the deep. The answer came as pressure, like the ocean pressing a hand to her chest. We dwell where you drown. You scrape our roofs. Your noise breaks our eggs. Eggs. The word hit harder than the pressure. A gigantic geometric form moved beyond the fleet's shadow. Not a living thing. A spire, black metal to the core, rising from the ditch like a tooth of some sleeping engine. Mara picked up the piece that was strapped to her harness. The lights got brighter and tighter until her visor went dark. Her outfit turned the pulse into one careful sentence. Key. Gone. Hours. She took it off and let it float between them, a piece of debt. The closest thing was reached not with a hand, but with a flare of plates that captured the metal and folded around it like a flower closing at night. The ring of lights become a softer blue. Can we share this ocean? Mara wanted to know. We take what we need. You do the same thing. We can draw your borders. We can stop our drilling close to your... She paused, tasting the word again. Nests, deep and extended silence. The fleet groaned and sighed far above. Down below, vents muttered and moved. The answer rose like a wave. Business. Silence. Truth. The ring shook. There were flashes of light in a wave. The suit's translator stuttered and then quickly translated. Storm. Quick. A lot of water. Hang on. Follow us. Not a threat. A warning. The ocean started to rise, first as a steady surge and then as a wall. Mara kicked for the rope and the winch screamed as the tether pulled her higher. She broke through to a moving deck, where sailors were running. Ion was yelling instructions at condensation towers, and kids were being pushed into harness points. The first wave impacted like a fist, making the planks creak and the shackles snap tight across the ship-to-ship connections. Cut east, someone yelled. No, Mara said, taking off her helmet. Follow them where the lights go. The pale flares spread out past the ring, forming a path that curved through dark water into lower swells. The helmsmen were caught between math and myth, but the second wave made the decision. The wheel of Helia turned. One ship followed, then three, and finally, the fleet's braided body swung like a single organism, weaving its way along the glowing tunnel. The storm sought to break them for hours. Water rose, tore, and pounded. The ring raced ahead, dropping beacons only when the swell made it safe to go down. It lifted them over sudden trenches that would have broken tethers like thread. Elder Kira laughed, a loud, wild sound in the middle of all the pandemonium. She thought that survival should not feel like grace, yet it did. The sea sank and breathed out when morning turned gray. The fleet drifted into a lee behind a jag of basalt, which was a unique spine of soil that was black and pointed. The ring stopped moving. One light stayed next to Helia's hull, moving up and down like a held breath. Truth. the translator said softly. You are not alone on the surface. A last pulse sent figures, angles, and lengths to a spot that no chart of Halvor had across Mara's visor. The brightness and the hum faded away, leaving only the creaking of ropes and the sound of people being tired in the morning. Ion wiped the salt from his eyes and stared at Mara. He murmured, "Are there others?" Mara looked at the empty ocean where the light had been and felt something deeper than terror for the first time since the world had drowned. "Or there will be," she said, "if we learn to listen." For 3 days, the Fleet of Halvor stayed in the shade of the black basalt cliffs, fixing torn sails, reforging broken chains, and caring for the storm's injured. But it wasn't the storm that scared the villagers. It was the coordinates that were seared into Mara's visor. Numbers that led to a destination far apart from their mapped currents. The drowned one said this area possessed truth. The council fought in the Helia's lantern-lit hall at night. Ion laid out maps of the Ion on the table, his hands quivering. If these figures are real, they lead to the South Gyre, which is past, the ruins of Chile. We don't have any charts that far. There are no flotillas that sail there. It's suicide. Elder Kira touched the empty fragment case where the black metal shard had been. But they led us through the storm when no compass could. There was no reason for them to save us. Why are you lying now? The room separated along lines that were already known. The merchants were afraid of risk, the captains were afraid of being ambushed, and the soldiers wanted confirmation that they could deal with the drowned ones or kill them. Mara stayed quiet the whole time, her mind going back to the vision of the trench spire rising from the abyss, its surface covered in engravings that were older than memory. The sea itself made the choice on the fourth dawn, not the council. Fishermen pulled in nets that were full with shell pieces with the same repeating symbols on them. The warning was clear. Go, or we will force you to. The fleet had set its sails by lunchtime. The trip south was harder for them than any conflict. The water got odd the farther they went. Currents changed without notice, pushing ships into whirlpools that appeared and disappeared in an instant. Storms didn't come from the clouds. They came from below, with huge walls of spray that broke masts in seconds. And always, under the waves the watchers swam, shadows that darted between hulls and sometimes brushed the keels with a buzz that shook the boards. One night, Mara woke up to nothing. No sound, no waves. There was only still water shining faintly with blue threads, like veins under clear skin. The Armada was in a sea that looked like it was alive. Sailors murmured from the decks that they had crossed into a place where humans shouldn't be. Ion held onto his tools and shouted calculations, but they didn't help. On the 12th day, the coordinates led them into a fog that covered the horizon. From it came shapes. Black stone buildings covered in algae that broke the surface like the teeth of a crown that had sunk. They were too normal to be real. Maybe the remains of a city. However, Halvor's records don't show that a city ever stood here. Anchors fell. Diving teams got ready. The council met, and every word was full with horror. One person warned, "If this is their city, we are trespassing." Mara shook her head. "No, they asked us to come." The divers went down with her in charge. Light stopped working after 30 meters. After 50, the towers were fully visible. They were made of a smooth metal that was bonded with coral and had spirals carved into them that pulsed as if they were alive. They got to the heart after 100 years. It was a dome that had been broken open by time, showing rooms lighted by geothermal fire. The truth was inside, bones from people that were fused with metal, skulls with the same sigils carved into them, jaws wired with copper, and ribs covered with steel. Not aliens or monsters. People who lived. People who had chosen the depths over the surface, changed by pressure, need, and ingenuity, until they were so desperate that they became something else. People made the drowned ones, not born them. The divers came up quietly, bringing proof with them. A corroded helmet stuck to a human skull, with wires running behind it like seaweed. When the relic hit the deck, the crowd jumped back as if it were still alive. Elder Kira's voice broke. "They are us." The news traveled through the fleet faster than fire. Fear, awe, and denial all fought in one storm. Some people yelled that the deep dwellers were family, lost and reborn. Others swore they were abominations, proof of what happened. when mankind compromised its form, and then, while the council tried to calm the clamor, the water answered again. A huge, complex hum erupted from the mist beyond the towers. It was a language that shook the fleet to its core. Lights flashed under the water, brighter than ever, and rose toward the surface. The drowned ones had heard about what they found, and they were coming to see if people on the surface were ready to see themselves in the mirror. The towers looked like black teeth, and when the hum got deeper, the etched spirals on them glowed brighter. The water around the Fleet of Halvor was churning, but not because of the wind or storm. It was because of movement below. Hundreds, no, thousands of lights spiraled up into a pale blue cage that surrounded the flotilla. People ran to the rails holding their kids and guns and looking terrified. Then the surface cracked. Figures sprang from the waves like memories trying to come back. They looked like men, but they weren't. Their limbs were long and covered in shiny metal. Their faces were half flesh and half mask, and their eyes pulsed like lamps. They stood, on the water itself, with jointed fins that opened up underneath them like living rafts. The fleet gasped. Some of them fell to their knees and prayed. Others raised their guns, but no one dared to shoot. Mara stepped forward on the deck of the Helia, her visor falling from her belt and her hands empty. Only she didn't flinch when the entities spoke. They didn't use lips. They used harmonics that made the hulls vibrate. The suit's translator moaned for a while, then got into a groove. Kin. Broken. Came back. Ion stumbled closer, looking pallid. They know we saw the bones. They are admitting it. Kira the Elder raised her staff. Then they have to explain. Her voice broke, but it stayed strong. Why hide in the dark if you're human? Why hit our divers? Why do you haunt us like ghosts? The harmonics changed. One of the figures raised an arm that was covered in coral and wire. The water between the ships swirled and rose, making a clear column of water. There were pictures of cities sinking, towers falling under waves, and people gasping for air inside it. Then, far deeper, men and women in rough suits sank into the black, combining bone with machine and carving spirals into steel as a form of prayer and science. We didn't hide. We made it through. The ocean made us who we are. We made ourselves. Forgot about the surface. Fear of the surface. Mara's throat got constricted. They weren't monsters. They were survivors who had chosen to change instead of die. But their tones were full of blame. A second column appeared, this one depicting ships above drilling into the seabed, breaking hives of luminous eggs and opening vents for minerals. Mara's heart sank. The fleet's survival cost something. You. Scrape our roofs. Your noise is killing our kids. You need to change, or we will. The words hurt more than waves. Ion cursed under his breath, but Kira lifted her hand. We didn't know. We couldn't see because we were so hungry. What do you want? The answer came quickly. Limits. Be quiet around nests. Steal tribute for safe waterways. And the truth. Truth? Mara said. The lights got brighter, nearly blinding. After that, the harmonics changed again. This time, the translator said words so sharp that the council stopped. You are not the only ones remaining. People on the deck yelled. The council yelled for answers, but the entities started to sink. People started to panic. Mara stepped up and yelled over the waves. Stop! Where? The nearest individual stopped, and their eyes shone like two beacons. Very far north, another fleet is held by ice. More powerful, more hungry. With that, they disappeared, the light spiraling down into the depths until only the dark towers were left, their brilliance fading into quiet. The ocean became calm. There was a lot of turmoil on the Helia. Some wanted war. How? Can they ask for money from the remaining free people? Others said they should work together since the storms would destroy them without help. And now, like a thundercloud, the ghost of another fleet, unknown and unfriendly, hung over them. Mara stood to the side, holding on to the rail until her knuckles bled. She finally understood how big Reality 129 was. Humanity had not drowned. It had scattered, splintered, evolved in ways both wonderful and horrifying. There were things in the waters. It was filled. Halvor was stuck in the center of an ocean that was too big, too deep, and too alive to accept ignorance any longer. It smelt like salt and fear in the Helia's council room. Chains held up lanterns that swung back and forth, making crazy shadows on the table where maps and broken tools were. Outside, the fleet muttered like a restless animal, and families whispered about the creatures that had come up from the depths. For the first time in a long time, the people of Halvor were not united by the need to survive. They were divided by what survival meant. "They want tribute," Captain Rune hissed, banging his fist on the table. "We hardly have any steel, and we can't afford silence. If we give in, they'll come back and ask for more. It's better to hit them now when they think we're weak." His voice shook with excitement, as if the conflict itself could wipe away the shame of the meeting. Elder Kira shook her head. Her weak hands drew the symbols that were drawn on the black piece, which are now etched in her mind. "Hit? What are you against, Rune? The sea has changed them into us. They helped us through the storm. They told us about other people. We battle our own mirror when we fight them." Ion, who was usually practical, leaned forward. "Whether they think about it or not, they have power. Children are dying because of rusty pipes and hulls are splitting at the seams. Tribute could mean staying alive. We'll trade our steel for their safety. With their help, we may find our way through the currents, stay away from storms, and maybe even do well." Run said, "Slavery with a nicer name." The room erupted into a fight. Honor was what soldiers wanted. Safety was a must for merchants. Priests whispered that the deep dwellers were horrible and needed to be gotten rid of. And outside, the gathering grew, and voices rose in chorus and gossip. Some wanted to join forces. Some people talked about torches and uprising. Mara sat quietly till the noise went away. Then she spoke, her voice quiet but sharp. "You are all mistaken. There is no tribute here. It's not about pride. It's about the truth they told us." She leaned forward, her eyes steely. "We're not alone. There is another flotilla in the north, more powerful, more hungry. We'll be crushed when the northerners get here if we waste our time fighting the drowned ones." The room was quiet. Rune even held back his rage. The idea of another fleet, maybe huge and ruthless, made everyone sick to their stomachs. "What should we do now?" Ion wanted to know. "Bend the knee to one power so we can face the other?" Mara shook her head. "No. We pay attention. We learn. We find out what their limits are and respect them for now. We become ready, not as beggars, but as equals who are waiting. We shall need friends who know the water better than we do if the northern fleet is coming." The brightness from the bulb made Kira's eyes shine. "Allies in the dark," she said softly. There was rumbling in the distance, but no storm had broken yet. Soon the council will tell the people of Halvor what they had chosen: tribute or rebellion, alliance or war. But there was one reality that rang like a flood rising against the hulls in every word. The ocean was more than just water now. It was a battlefield of nations, of families that had been changed, and of survival engraved into bone and steel. And the time when they drifted, without a goal, was coming to an end. The sea was gloomy and heavy, and the sky looked like iron straining on a horizon that wouldn't break. The fleet of Halvor traveled north for weeks, and Mara's knowledge of the drowned one's coordinates was like a scar. The hum of watchers underneath. The water had become a familiar sound, sometimes far away and sometimes so close that the hulls shook. They weren't guardians yet. They were just shadows that followed the fleet, judging in silence whether it was worth rescuing. When they saw land, it wasn't the jagged crown of basalt spires they had been expecting. It was smoke. Columns of it coming up from the water, black and greasy against the wind. The fleet from the north was close. By nightfall, the Halvor flotilla had reached the top of a wave and saw them, a fleet so big that it blocked the horizon. Hundreds of ships were tied together in a violent way, with hulls covered in steel that had been stolen and sails that had been painted crimson and black. Flames flared in the middle of the towers, which were fueled by oil pumped from the depths. Halvor's ships creaked with age, but they were full of weapons, ballistae that had been changed to shoot harpoons, and decks packed with cages holding prisoners who stared blankly at the ocean. Skara's iron fleet. More powerful, more hungry. Just like the drowned one said it would. They saw Halvor before it got dark. A loud horn echoed across the river, and then a message in rough light from one of their towers appeared. Letters of fire that burned through the mist. Bend. Or break. Halvor felt a wave of panic. Families held on to their kids. Soldiers held on to guns that were rusty. Some people begged the council to run south, even if the Iron Fleet could catch up to them. Others told them to give up. Some, like Captain Rune, yelled for combat, but the despairing look in his eyes gave him away. Mara stood on the front of the Helia and looked at the unending line of red sails. She thought about the drowned ones, the spire in the trench, and the bones that were stuck together with wire. They had indicated that we are not alone on the surface. She thought about whether this was what they meant. Kin distorted by hunger, and ambition instead of the sea. The seas altered as the Iron Fleet got closer. There was a quiet vibration under the ships that was greater than thunder and deeper than any storm. The lake was lit up by hundreds, thousands of pale flames all around the battlefield. The drowned ones had arrived. The council rushed to respond, but Mara was already yelling at the helmsman. "Stay in line! Don't shoot, don't run, just watch the water!" The Iron Fleet didn't think twice. Harpoons were fired, huge chains were spinning, and projectiles were flying toward Halvor's lead ships. But the sea came up to meet them. A wall of water sprung up, engulfing the bolts and throwing them aside without hurting them. Obsidian forms appeared from the depths, taller and more numerous than before. Their segmented fins opened up into shields. The murmur grew louder and louder. The Skara ships lost their way. Their captives yelled. The Iron Fleet looked unsure for the first time. A voice echoed through the water, getting louder with each hull and deck. Mara's suit even translated it from a distance. Pick. You drown while you're alone. You get through it together. It wasn't a command. It was a last chance. Mara went to the council and spoke in a voice that was as stern as iron. This is it. We stand with them, or Skara will lead us. Elder Kira raised her staff, shaking yet determined. Then let history say we chose the sea, not the sword. Mara raised her arms high on the deck of the Helia. Halvor sails with the deep, she said, as the wind and waves conveyed her words. The drowned ones spoke. Light spread out, making a bright path across the ocean. The waves below Halvor surged ahead, and the currents pulled the fleet into the path of safety. The Skara ships tried to follow them, but the lights changed and the currents changed. The sea itself kept the two fleets apart. The Iron Fleet shot. Again, but the storm got worse. Waves as high as fortresses slammed down on their ships. Fires put out, chains broke, hulls broke. By daylight, there was only a little bit of wreckage left, floating like bones on the sea. Halvor sailed on, following the bright wake of their new friends. The residents gathered on their decks in silence, watching lights weave beneath the waves like stars coming back to life. They were terrified still, but for the first time, that terror carried hope. Mara looked into the lake, where people and things that weren't people swam next to one another. She remembered the word they had used, truth, and knew it wasn't only about the sea. It was about what people could become when they had to do more than be proud to stay alive. Earth was not submerged in reality 129. It came back to life. As Halvor's fleet followed the light into the unknown horizon, Mara said to herself, half prayer and half vow, "We're not alone, we never were, we will never be again." Welcome to Beyond the Fractals. Subscribe now and explore every reality.